Good morning on New Year's Day in Israel. I have a backlog of really great material. I think I've mentioned this already. And I'm going to be sharing at a bit of a clip for the next week or so. There's a balance when managing a venture like State of Tel Aviv. One never wants to be stuck without fresh material, but in the last few months, I've accumulated an embarrassment of riches. A combination of prudent planning on my part and an unceasing flow of hugely important news events that I simply could not defer by a week or two. Every week brought some fresh new crisis. Even though we do not aspire to be a breaking news site, and we are not, the pace of events that demanded immediate attention has been unrelenting. The Hezbollah war, pager and walkie-talkie week or two, serial assassinations, Iranian attacks and threats, the International Criminal Court, the Houthis roaring, Hamas 15 months on, still putting up one hell of a fight and refusing to surrender and release the hostages, the fall of Bashar al-Assad, the dictator of Syria, an American election, perhaps the most important one in my lifetime, etc. The urgent matters took precedence. And the conversation that I had with Michael Starr on December 4th, which you will hear today, was deferred, but not because it is not important. On December 1st, the Jerusalem Post ran a story by Michael entitled, "An IDF Reservist's Top 10 Takeaways After Returning from Gaza." It is a peek into one man's experience on the front lines. You can find the link to the article in the podcast notes. I reached out immediately to Michael, and we recorded our conversation that you will listen to here on December 4th. This is possibly one of the most challenging interviews I've done. Not because he was or is difficult, but because we get into very sensitive territory, which is his direct experience in IDF reserve duty during the last 15 months. It's not politics. It's not social commentary. It's war, as Michael puts it.
War is terrible. War is chaos. And that's why it needs to be kept inside that Pandora's box. And it was Hamas that unleashed it. That's why it's so important to avoid war in the first place and, to prevent future war. That's why victory is so important. But all the West seems to know how to do anymore is to slowly lose rather than to win. And I think that the hubris of thinking that you're above the demands of conflict and everything that war entails, but you don't actually want to solve the problems that cause it, I think that's going to lead to a lot more deaths, not just in Gaza and Lebanon, but also in war zones like Syria and in Ukraine. And I think the West needs to wake up to the realities of war before reality burns them.
I was blown away by his candor. He is the Diaspora Affairs reporter at the Jerusalem Post. But since October 7th, he has served more than 200 days of reserve duty with the IDF. Michael speaks of the high motivation of his reservist colleagues, his concern regarding lapses in discipline, which he had not experienced previously in service, and an erosion of trust between the soldiers doing the heavy lifting and higher-level personnel in the IDF, what he refers to as October 6th officers. This criticism is something one hears often in Israel when speaking to people who are serving or have served. The way in which the bureaucracy of the army has resulted in a culture that, as with all bureaucracies, rewards completion of tasks without thinking adequately about the purpose of the task. Just check off the box. Don't rock the boat if you want to get ahead. And if I may push this a little, many feel that it is precisely this attitude that was pervasive among the higher-ups in the IDF, who dismissed Hamas's plans to attack, which were well known. They dismissed them as being the result of overheated imaginations in the Gaza Strip. In recent days, new information has been made public on Israel's Channel 12 News, reporting, based on information from Hamas computers that were seized in the Gaza Strip over the last 15 months, That meticulous planning in preparation for an eventual October 7th had been ongoing since 2016. Disciplined, detailed gathering of intelligence within and about Israeli border communities, down to the IP and home addresses, telephone numbers, and more, regarding many security and municipal officials. For 7 years, they did this, under the nose of the IDF and Shin Bet. Hamas, the generals and colonels, decided they did not have a chance against the infallible IDF and the billion-dollar fence. Well, as we know, Hamas terrorists merely shot out the few cameras along the border fence that were actually working. In doing so, they blinded the limited IDF forces that were on duty that holiday weekend in 2023. The rest was as easy as tearing holes in the above-ground fence with bulldozers. Very low tech. Simple and brilliant, as a now retired IDF high-ranking officer who doubles as a friend of mine noted. Brilliant because it was so simple. So, when people like Michael Starr share the piercing observation that he does in his piece and this interview, we really ought to pay careful attention. We get into the hostages, reservist morale after a year, Western decline and cynicism, genocide, and more. I'm Vivian Berkovich, former Canadian ambassador to Israel, and now thinking that we must give voice to people like Michael. And the best way to do that would be in a state commission of inquiry, ASAP, so that we understand and can try to prevent falling into other bad habits. Unfortunately, Prime Minister Netanyahu has moved from saying that we'll do that when the war is won to now saying, actually, there's no need for a state commission of inquiry, which, in my submission, is exactly why we need one. Stay with us. And just before we get into the interview with Michael Starr, I want to thank you all for being here. Every reader and listener matters. However, we are independent and rely upon paid subscribers to deliver this content, which I believe is consistently of high quality, and clearly you agree because you listen and read time after time. The statistics don't lie. We invest significant time, effort, and passion into this work. Nothing, not even the podcasts and written articles from State of Tel Aviv, are free in this life. Please consider showing your appreciation for the work we do. To those who have taken out paid subscriptions, boundless thanks. Next week, we are bringing you an in-depth 2-part podcast on what the heck is going on in Canada with respect specifically to anti-Semitism. It's an issue I've been living for many years and been working on this podcast in particular for 2 months now. You do not want to miss it. Thanks for being here. Best wishes for a happy new year. And now to the main event, Michael Starr. Wednesday, December 4th, 5:30 in the evening. Michael Starr, thank you so much for joining State of Tel Aviv.
Thank you for having me.
So we had a little chat just before we began to record. And what I didn't know was that you are a fellow Canadian living in Israel, hailing from,
I'm originally from Toronto, and I lived in Victoria, British Columbia for a bit.
and you've been here for how many years now in Israel?
Been here for about 15 years, came here in 2009.
Well, it's amazing that we haven't crossed paths before, but nice to meet a fellow Canuck. And the reason that I wanted to talk to you today, you, of course, are the Diaspora Affairs reporter at the Jerusalem Post, which is one of the major newspapers here, English language. Just a few days ago, earlier this week, the Jerusalem Post published a piece written by you, and it's titled An IDF Reservist's Top 10 Takeaways After Returning from Gaza. It's an extraordinary piece. It's, aside from being very well written and insightful, you take on some very tough topics. And I reached out to you right away because I thought, I want to talk to this person. And I think people should hear what he has to say. And of course, we will post in the podcast notes the link to Michael's piece. You were in Gaza. You've had 2 tours of duty in the Gaza Strip since October 7, 2023. Tell us just when was your first one and when was your second, please?
So I was drafted right on October 7th. I was called up the day of the massacre. We didn't know the full extent of it at the time. And, we took probably more time than we should have to get ready in our staging base and get our equipment, which was still in kit bags and not by any means ready. And we went down to the kibbutzim and helped secure them on the 10th, I believe it was. And just before Hanukkah, we joined the IDF efforts in Gaza itself. And we were there until in the Khan Yunis kind of area securing another security corridor that I don't believe is in use anymore. And then we moved later on to a site within a city within Venezuela, I believe it's called. And we were there until the end of January.
So your first tour was 4 months.
Yep, it was a 4-month tour. This one was a little bit shorter with about, I guess, 80 days, a little bit over 80 days.
And when were you called up? What were the dates, more or less, of your second tour?
Second tour, August 8th, and we finished in the middle of November.
So it's interesting. There's a significant gap. You were released from service, from reserve duty at the end of January 24, and then back August 8th. So, an 7-month gap in there. What were your sort of general observations in terms of how the situation on the ground had changed between the end of January and early August?
There was a sense that we're facing a much weaker enemy, one that had been significantly degraded. When we were first there, every other day, there seemed to have been a hit-and-run RPG attack. It'd pop out of tunnels, fire, and then pop away. They operated, again, mostly in the dusk and dawn hours, but they did not cling to the dim light as slavishly as they do now. They seem to be much more afraid to go out at night and day. I think they feel that we have the advantage in night vision, which suggests that that equipment is lacking now. And they also seem to be afraid to go out during the day, which shows that if they're afraid of UAVs and being spotted, it suggests that their tunnel infrastructure has been compromised severely. And I think that's also indicated by a lot of their propaganda videos, which shows a lot of walking between buildings, running between buildings, and then trying to bob and weave through that, as opposed to popping out of a tunnel and shooting. They have to work a bit to get to their attack site. So it's a much more depleted enemy. I feel that the troops were a lot more experienced on our end. So we've adapted a lot to both the tunnel warfare methods of Hamas, the demands of the urban environment, and again, to reiterate, general skill level.
I hope you have enjoyed listening to this point. The full podcast is available to paying subscribers only. Please consider becoming one so that we have the resources required to do this work. In the meantime, thanks for being here and best wishes for the coming year. We love hearing from you, so please comment on our website, stateoftelaviv.com, or send us a note to hello@stateoftelaviv.com. On behalf of the State of Tel Aviv core team, Jan Szabo, our creative, graphic, visual, and marketing man, Amir White, producer and editor extraordinaire, sound guy, who is also impressively patient with me and my boomer tech deficiencies, and our social media manager who pitches in on everything, Maya Naftalin. Thanks to the team. Thanks to you for being here. We'll be back soon.